Hello, and welcome to Dynamics of a Podcast, the only podcast dedicated to Professor James Moriarty. We did check. Napoleon of crime and arch nemesis of Sherlock Holmes. Today, we have a very special episode, as you can see, and we will get to that in a minute. Because it is now 2022, so happy belated New Year. 4 more Sherlock Holmes stories are in the public domain, and the last 2 will join them next year. Thank God we are so close. And as we are recording, it is BSI Weekend. So quick note, if I'm at all slow or tired today, it is because last night was pub night, which we talked about last couple of episodes, and we were partying late and waiting around forever to find out who got invested into the Baker Street Irregulars, because that was also going on in New York at the same time. We want to express a hearty congratulations to BSI class of 2022. It was a fabulous class, and I think we are all very excited about it. So, one announcement before we dive in. The Society 5 Miles from Anywhere is hosting the regular first of the month meeting on Saturday, February 5th, and there will be a panel about what makes for a great Sherlock Holmes villain. I will be on that panel, and so will brand new BSI, Rob Nunn, aka Elementary. And I'm very excited about that. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. If you want to come, you can email Derrick Belanger at derrick@belangerbooks.com, and he will be happy to put you on the mailing list. Or if you can't make it, a recording will probably go up on their YouTube channel later. So that's also an option. All right, that's it for announcements and info. Time to get to the good stuff. We are celebrating BSI Weekend with our first, possibly our last, but never say never, table discussion, which I think is a pretty cool way to start our second season. And oh my gosh, this is our second season. We've got a lot of guests today, and we are so excited to see you all here. Thank you for coming. So our discussion today is about what makes a Moriarty, and who do we think does or would do it best. We are approaching this topic with the idea that while the canon is the canon, Sherlock Holmes has become something like a modern mythology, where not one but many people contribute to these stories, kind of like King Arthur or Robin Hood. After all, it was Sidney Paget who contributed the Deerstalker and William Gillette who added the Calabash Pipe and Inverness Cloak. And while we know these things are not canon, they are nevertheless an accepted part of the Sherlockian mythos. You can recognize a Sherlockian by the Deerstalker. So this mythos is always expanding, and Sherlock Holmes, John Watson, and yes, James Moriarty have grown ever more elastic as new stories shapeshift the characters and push them in different directions. And arguably, Moriarty's character has always been a little more elastic than our Baker Street boys. Moriarty has been a harmless teacher,
an Anglo-Egyptian cultist,
a figment of Holmes's imagination,
Holmes's alter ego,
a clone,
a computer program,
a dog,
a cat,
a mouse adapted into a rat,
a food mascot,
a vigilante,
a regenerating gender-fluid alien,
a psychological counselor,
and an art restorer.
And Moriarty can have varied occupations, genders, and even species. So, what is it that makes this character who he or she is? So, gotta admit a couple of people while I was talking. So, who wants to start this off? What do you think makes a Moriarty?
I'll get you started off if you'd like.
Okay.
When you're considering Moriarty in screens, television, movies, there's a variation of looks. So if you want to basically start with the Moriartys that look the most like the canon description by Sidney Paget, you basically have 2 choices in my book. And that's Eric Porter, who was selected by the Granada series because of his look to match the Paget illustrations. And you also have Victor, I'm not too good with Russian names, Victor Yegrafov, who unfortunately died recently.
Yeah.
But he's a dead ringer for the canon description also. And he had the added advantage of he was a stuntman who wasn't originally selected for the part, but he was so good in the action scene, they gave him the full part. So
Which is pretty cool.
that's a good jump off point for the many Moriartys there are, if you want to go strictly by looks in canon.
Yeah.
So others might agree or disagree with that, but that's my opinion on it.
I think there have been I've seen one or two older photos of older films Moriartys that at least are going towards the look, and then Colin Jevons was actually made up to look like Moriarty in the show The Baker Street Boys, but yeah, that's about it in terms of looks. At most, Moriartys don't actually look the way that Holmes describes Moriarty, or indeed the Paget illustration. So, anybody else got any thoughts about what makes a Moriarty a Moriarty?
I've written down a few notes here.
Mm-hmm.
They pretty much follow what Howard said. Moriarty should be an aging academic. He should be quietly spoken but menacing. When you have that much power, you don't need to shout. He should not explicitly threaten, because it's deeds, not words. I am going to follow with my personal feeling of Eric Porter, because I feel he was well served by the Granada series, because the idea of slotting Moriarty seamlessly into the Red-Headed League and playing that before the final problem gives Moriarty backstory continuity and a build-up story to the final problem itself. And I think that's really good, because, okay, controversial opinion coming up, Moriarty is relatively poorly served in the canon. He's bumped off in the first story he appeared. He's talked about in flashback, and then there's a belated prequel right at the end of the series of books,
Right.
with the occasional reference. So he's better served in the adaptation than in the original.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I don't think that's necessarily controversial. That's absolutely fair. So anybody else want to weigh in?
I'd like to follow up on what Robin said, because I'm a big fan of Andrew Scott, and to me he looks like Moriarty, but his character, it reminds me of when Heath Ledger took on the Joker. It became something more than the little bit of original material. So I think that's part of why I like him. He kind of has that look for me, but then he kind of transcends the character a little bit in his portrayal of him.
Yeah, let me come in here. When I brought up the ones that look like the canon most, it doesn't mean those are my favorite Moriartys. I mean, I like to be entertained. So I'm not going to strictly go by the canon in anything I watch. It's the entertainment value. And Andrew Scott has got to be fantastic for entertainment. But another one is Daniel Davis. I mean, it's out there in Star Trek. He was too. I mean, that was superior.
Oh, yeah, we are big Daniel Davis fans on this podcast. Yeah, for sure.
I have never felt more seen watching those two Star Trek episodes with Data absolutely nerding and geeking out over Shaw. Oh, that's the story in which I'm like, that it's me. For my money, my favorite Moriarty is Jared Harris, because he's the one that I sort of imprinted onto when I saw Game of Shadows as a young newbie. Oh gosh, how old must I have been? 16, 50, something like that. And I saw Game of Shadows. That was the first adaptation of The Final Problem that I had ever seen. So I think that also ties back in the question of what makes a Moriarty, because I think that we should see to some extent that he is Holmes's intellectual equal, that he's almost a mirror or a shadow of Holmes himself, and had Holmes, Holmes being decent and fundamental upright as he is, but you always have to wonder if things had gone differently, he'd taken a different path. Could he have wound up or become, like Moriarty? Who's to say? And I think that Moriarty is sort of a reflection of that. And I think Jared Harris does a good job portraying that. Oh, yes, Howard.
When she said, Olivia said, what makes Moriarty a Moriarty, it made me think of the anime, the Moriarty the Patriot. Now, if you want to go into the Moriarty family, that's a very interesting anime. I mean, that's super to watch. I love that.
Mm-hmm. I have not actually seen that show yet, but I've been recommended it, so I'll definitely
check. On you. Shame on you. What are you doing in this discussion, Olivia? I haven't seen Moriarty the Patriot. I know her. You can be teased by me. Don't worry. I'm not an old meanie, folks.
I'm actually not a huge anime fan.
Me
it
either.
Was like one of the other fandoms, like Jane Austen, that kind of passed by me when I was, getting into sci-fi and mysteries in middle school and high school. So everybody else I knew was getting into anime, and I never went through an anime phase. I don't know much about anime. The only one I've ever really watched is Cowboy Bebop, which is the one anime that every and Studio Ghibli films. Those are, so and they're all
it's definitely more. I have a limited experience with anime. It's definitely more anime than some of the other animes that I've seen, in that they really lean into like the visual tropes of anime. And the emotional outbursts and stuff, like Mrs. Hudson wailing on Sherlock in the middle of the street. It's really funny. And like, you couldn't do that anywhere other than an anime. But it totally works in the genre. I've only seen a few episodes. I still need to get through the whole show, but yeah, it's really good. And it really, it again pushes the envelope of what it means to be a Moriarty. We actually got a little statement from Derrick Belanger, who may or may not be showing up here because he is at the Gillette luncheon currently. But he said he was going to pop in if he could. But he is a fan also of the anime. So, Dixie, do you want to read that statement from him?
Okay. Why William James Moriarty and Moriarty the Patriot is a great Moriarty. Unfortunately, due to a previous scheduled engagement, I am unable to participate in the episode of Dynamics of a Podcast on the topic of favorite versions of Moriarty. A big thank you to Madeline Quiñones for allowing me to write a statement in defense of my now personal favorite Moriarty, that being William James Moriarty of the anime masterpiece, Moriarty the Patriot. For those of you unfamiliar with the work, the story reimagines the young Professor Moriarty working alongside his brothers Lee and Albert as they help the marginalized in Britain and plan to significantly change the British class system. While the story plays loose with the canon, the characters are essentially their Doylean selves. Moriarty is a master criminal, and Sherlock Holmes is the great detective we all know and love. What really makes William James Moriarty stand out is that this version of the Napoleon of crime is one with believable motivation. Most takes on Moriarty just tell us that he is an evil foil of Sherlock Holmes. Very few bothers to show us why. Yes, William James Moriarty does unspeakable acts, mercilessly slaying members of England's aristocracy. The man is a master criminal after all, but he has a strong reason behind his actions. As an orphan, he saw firsthand the brutal treatment of the poor and downtrodden in Victorian England. It is understandable why he would take such strong actions to end the brutality he witnessed. While not everyone will agree with this take on Moriarty, I believe all Sherlockians should, at the very least, respect it. This Moriarty is intelligent, cunning, and an equal to both Holmes brothers. While murder is never condoned, his actions have the ulterior motive of bringing about a much better society, one that closes the gap between rich and poor and bestows more rights on all Britons. It is this motivation which makes Moriarty a patriot, and why this version why this is my favorite version of the character.
The concept of Moriarty as an anti-hero is, I mean, it's definitely a new take. I'm not sure. I think I'd like to watch the anime just to see how I feel about it, because I'm so into Moriarty as just a villain. I could have an easier time seeing Holmes as an anti-hero more than Moriarty, but it's definitely
well, I know there's I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. There's a couple of series of novels that kind of take that. The Michael Curlin's series kind of makes him more of a straightforward hero who's committing crimes to fund his astronomical research. And John Gardner's series, he's kind of a villain protagonist in a sort of interesting way. But yeah.
Howard.
Actually, Moriarty the Patriot is a very popular stage play in Japan.
Oh,
Also,
really?
yeah, very. It might have even come before the anime. Now that I think about it.
Gosh, I'd like to see that.
Yeah, a little musical in there.
I'm going on the wiki for Moriarty the Patriot, and I've noticed that they're finally, giving some credit and introducing or having more of Sebastian Moran.
Yes.
Who another reason why I like the Guy Ritchie and Jared Harris version so much is because they do have Sebastian Moran, and they give him a character personality. They finally give him a time in the spotlight. And other adaptations, even the Faithful Granada series, well, I mean, the reason why, because it was faithful, but you just don't see that in other adaptations. They had a chance with BBC Sherlock and they blew it. That's just my personal.
No, they did. Yeah. Not gonna argue there.
You maniacs.
But yeah, like my ideal Moriarty is Eric Porter, but with like the sensibility of how they handled Moriarty and Moran in Game of Shadows. That's for me, that's the dream.
Yeah, murder boyfriends going to the opera. Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful.
Howard.
What I thought, sorry,
I was Howard, then Kristin. So Howard, you go first.
Why don't you let Kristin go first, because I might change the subject just a hair.
Okay, Kristin, go ahead.
I was gonna say, thank you, Howard. I was gonna say something I found interesting about Game of Shadows is that they basically kind of switched Moriarty and Moran's like social positions from the canon. Like in the canon, Moriarty is the one who's had some kind of public disgrace.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Moran's disgrace is well known, and Moriarty still has his chair, which I thought was a really interesting something. I don't know. Don't have any deep thoughts on it, but something I noticed.
It's neat to see Moriarty as a professor, because that doesn't really happen a lot.
Yeah.
Well, here's the point I was going to make was actually for actor-wise, Moriarty and Holmes are really a yin and a yang, two sides of the same coin. And most actors that play Sherlock Holmes could play a good Moriarty or vice versa. And it goes all the way back to the silent films with John Barrymore. And his Moriarty was a German fellow named Gustav von Seifertitz. And all the reviews, when I was writing the book on the subject of silent films, all the reviews, the people thought that Barrymore played both parts because they couldn't decipher between the two of them.
Wow.
So you picture them together, yeah. That's how much. So I think another view, you'll find a lot of Sherlock Holmes actors have played Moriarty and vice versa.
That's really cool. I've never seen that film. Now I've got to try just to see what people are seeing in that regard. That's really something. Robin, what did you want to say?
Just thinking about the anime and conflating that with the Game of Shadows, where you've got a slightly more steampunk knockabout Sherlock Holmes. I'm rather fond of the Tom and Jerry meets Sherlock Holmes, and the rather that Malcolm McDowell playing Moriarty, and the way it flip flops between the human characters and the animal characters, you know, and it all hangs together beautifully.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But the great thing about Malcolm McDowell, of course, getting back to my other point, he dials it down. It's not eye rolling drama, and that means you can appreciate the humor.
Yeah, I because of Theater Goers Homeward Bound, I recently saw when they screened Tom and Jerry Meet Sherlock Holmes for like the first time in a decade, and I enjoyed it more this time. Although I still hold against them that they had John Rhys Davies as Watson and did like practically nothing with him. I think that was a crime. Yes, David. Did you?
Yeah, I was actually going to just throw a couple of pennies in here. First of all, I do, to echo what someone else said, as written, Moriarty isn't much of a character. So he's an archetype, and any actor or writer has to basically give them something more than that general archetype. It just has to give them some kind of specificity. And the more interesting it is, the more interesting a Moriarty you end up with. And that comes down to, among other things, why are they doing anything that they're doing? And I will note just two things here. I have a project that I hope to eventually get to, a writing project that's set in a slightly alternate modern world, in which there's a superhero team, and there's twin sisters in the team, and their names are Marie and Antoinette Moriarty.
Nice.
And because they're a whole family of supervillains, and these are the superheroes that are part of, and that the leader of the family has become a dictator of a small Latin American nation, and has completely turned it around. It's now something close to a paradise, because he simply is making the argument to the world, says you should let me run things, because obviously I'm better than you are. But I also want to just vote out for one of my personal favorite, because everybody's mentioned really, really fine performances and versions of Moriarty. But I came in late, so maybe this one wasn't mentioned, but it's a favorite of mine, which is, of course, Professor Ratigan.
Yes.
Who
Ratigan and Basil.
The most deliciously, over the top, just evil.
Yes, for sure.
Starring Ratigan and Basil as the world's most bitter ex-boyfriends. It's like wonderful. I apologize for my slash comments, but I do.
I mean, it's a valid part of the fandom. We haven't shied away from talking about it before.
Okay.
No, but I was thinking in preparation for this episode, and Dixie and I unfortunately didn't get as much chance to talk about stuff before the episode like we usually do. Oh my gosh. Yeah. but it's, the thing is, I want to say that Moriarty is actually a fairly well-defined character, because we get a fabulous introduction to him, really. But it pains me to do this, but I will give you this. He doesn't have that much of a personality. And I think that that's where we fill in the gaps. So you can have a well-defined character without giving him terribly much of a personality, and which hurts my soul, but it's true. because we really don't see very much of him. We are told more about him than we see. Howard.
Exactly.
Yeah,
I mean,
invisibility of Moriarty is an important point you're making right there. But now you've got a couple, being that Radigan came up. Let me bring up McCavity, the mystery.
Yes.
Yeah, T.S. Eliot, McCavity, the mystery cat. That's a great poem if anybody wants to read something Moriarty-wise.
Mm-hmm.
But we got to give some credit, too, to Andrew Scott again, because Billie Eilish did a song, You Should See Me in a Crown. So he's got a #1 hit song with him.
Yeah, I need to, I still need to listen to that song. I just can't watch the music video because it has spiders in it, right? I can't do that.
They have one, there's different versions. There's one
Okay.
that actually wears a crown in an anime kind of version, yeah. But yeah, the other one has spiders, yeah.
Yeah, can't do that.
I once gave McCavity the mystery cat at a poetry contest when I was in high school. I managed to, I went to state, and then sadly I did not win at state. I was like, you have no taste in literature.
Well, when Dixie has a kitten, well, he's a big kitten now. He's a very big boy.
He's going to be a year old next month.
Yeah, but when she first got him, I was like, you should name him McCavity. He didn't, but that was my suggestion.
I ended up naming him Pippin after the Hobbit in Lord of the Rings.
And then you got exactly what you named him for.
Yes.
He is a cat of mischief.
Yes.
Oh my.
David,
If
go
I
ahead.
may. Oh, I was going to say, just to take something of, I should explain, I'm a playwright.
Mhm.
And it's, the thing about Moriarty is, in the original story is, he's a good character, but he's a tertiary character. He's not even a secondary. He functions in the story the same way, a comet coming to the Earth functions. He's just a threat.
Oh, that's a good way of putting it.
That's why he's just, I mean, he's a tertiary character. You don't give the full background to a tertiary character, but the potential there of a true antagonist to the fascinating Sherlock Holmes is why people resurrect him. And then they try to give him a personality and many, many more facets of this person, of character. It's Lestrade is a secondary character.
Right.
Yeah.
In terms of, in this, if you think that, of course, like throughout the canon, it's Watson and Holmes are the primary characters.
Right.
And the major characters are the secondary ones. For example, Sir Henry Baskerville is a secondary character. Dr. Roylott is a secondary character. But Moriarty has so little time, and his function is basically has nothing to do with any kind of personality he might have. It's just he's there to be a star, a dangerous MacGuffin who is so I mean, I think that's why people want to take him and turn him into a more interesting villain, a la Dr. Doom or Magneto. And it's one of the most fascinating things of how people approach Sherlock Holmes is what do they do with Moriarty?
Yeah.
Just as I think what they do, and I think somewhat slight off, if they did more with Mary Watson and Mrs. Hudson, I think that would expand things very nicely quite a bit.
Yes.
Yeah.
For sure. Edith, what did you want to say?
I just wanted to say that it's true that Moriarty gets very little sort of airtime in the canon, but he's in most ways mirrored with Sherlock Holmes, who is the primary character of primary characters in the canon. So you can't very easily sort of put him into a third, tertiary slot, because he's given importance by the fact that he is sort of the inverse of Sherlock Holmes. And for the same reason, the way that Moran is usually left out is it doesn't quite feel right, because Moran is to Moriarty the way that John Watson is to Sherlock Holmes. So
absolutely.
Yeah, but
together.
that's
It has to be both or none.
but I was just to defend the paradigm I'm using. In terms of like, the question is how much do you learn about the character? It depends, and whether or not, what is the focus of the story? There's an acronym I use, which is PACT. In my mind, almost all stories, certain, and particularly, my areas, theater plays, generally are strongest in one of four aspects. And the PACT is plot, atmosphere, theme, character. I'm sorry, character, theme. And and honestly, the Sherlock Holmes stories are focused on plot and atmosphere, more than anything else. The characters are there because it's not like you ignore all these things. It's a matter of what's primary. The characters are there, but they're really no more explored than they have to you for the given story. And it's a matter of how much do you know about Moriarty? Very little.
You know more about Moriarty than you know about most of the main characters. You certainly know more about the biography of Moriarty.
You know about his biography, but you don't know about him. You don't have any idea of why he's doing anything, really.
But you don't know why Sherlock Holmes is doing anything apart from, using his intellectual muscles.
Yeah, but you know a great deal overall about Sherlock Holmes, a great deal.
You've got 60 stories.
Whereas you know almost nothing about Moriarty. Moriarty he functions as a point of plot. I'm not saying that the character is not important. I'm saying that the character simply is thin, and that there is very little there. And that's why people adapting the story expand on it, quite understandably. But that's why in terms of my strategy is that how much do we know about him? It indicates he's tertiary, because we don't need to know much about him, because he functions as the shark in Jaws.
That's fair. Okay, so we've got a bunch of people who want to say things. So let's see. Val, I think you were the first one to raise your hand, so go ahead.
All right. I assume you can hear me.
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
Thank you very much. If I could take the two characters, and here I'm stepping beyond the canon, I'm going to the Sherlock iteration, the recent
multiverse.
Yeah, okay, there you are.
Variants.
I feel that I gain more insight into the character of the sister that really isn't, okay? That I came to understand that character. I understand, if you will, or at least see that character as more solid than the teasing guy they had as Moriarty. When I read Laura King's, not Laura King,
Laura King,
the Mary Russell.
Yeah, that's Moriarty King. Yeah.
When I read those stories, boy, she does a good job on Mary Russell. But I come to understand more about the inner workings, even of perceiving Mr. Holmes. But how I wish that unknown sister, so to speak, or the hidden sister character could have, that style for that character could flesh out more of Moriarty, because that's how I perceive Moriarty, this very intelligent, very cold, but very deranged individual. So for me, who is the best Moriarty? Isn't Moriarty at all. It's the unknown or unspoken of sister.
All right.
Kristin, I think that you had your hand up next, so go ahead.
Sure. I was going to just kind of building on what David and Edith were talking about, with sort of like how much do we know of Moriarty. I think that's why I wish more adaptations would do anything with Inspector MacDonald, because I think the image he gives of Moriarty in Valley of Fear, first of all, it's just funny.
Yeah.
But it's also this view. It's really the only time we get a view of Moriarty that isn't mediated through Holmes telling Watson about Moriarty or leaving the note or whatnot, that it's, he doesn't, at least to MacDonald, he doesn't come across as this like obvious villain. He seems like kind of a normal academic guy who's in his office and talks about eclipses and loans him a book. And I think that's fun, and that's something I'd like to see more of in, I think, adaptations and pastiches, is sort of like, how do other people in this universe perceive this character?
Yeah. That's a good point.
I completely agree. And I think that's also one of the reasons I like Jared Harris's version so much, is because when you first meet him, and he's even, talking with Holmes, he's just sitting in his office, talking with students, listening to some music. He's vibing. And, Holmes mentions how he likes to go down to the park and feed pigeons. And so he just comes across as like this harmless, eccentric. And then as the film goes along, you start to see how twisted and depraved he really is, up to and including torturing Holmes, which, yeesh, that seems, I still have a hard time watching that scene.
I know.
I love that movie. But it's like you see this progression from like, he's kind of threatening, you go from mild to little to threatening, and then the scene on the train, you know how serious he is, and then it's like, oh, this is actually how deranged I truly am and how far unwilling I am to go. So
well, it in terms of like other characters perceiving him, really the way the Guy Ritchie films introduce Moriarty is through Irene Adler, and that the conflation of Moriarty and Irene is a whole nother podcast episode. It really is. But you are introduced to how dangerous he is through Irene. She considers him a threat from the first, and she's like, Sherlock, you don't want to tangle with him. And then of course eventually she gets fridged at the start of Game of Shadows, and I'm not better at all. I'm not better. I really love for them to pull her out of that fridge, but I don't know if they will. But yeah.
She's faking it. There's no way she's actually dead. She's gonna come.
I wish. I love Rachel McAdams as Irene. I think she's a great Irene. Okay, so Brad, I think that you had your hand up next, so go ahead.
Okay. Now, as we've discussed here, there's this aspect of Moriarty where he's the hidden mastermind behind everything. He's hidden away. We never see him. He doesn't come in. But there's also the need to bring in Moriarty as an adversary to fight Sherlock. There's this conflict going on in any adaptation. So I would like to point out the underappreciated genius of the movie Holmes and Watson, where they put a pseudo Moriarty in to fight Holmes and Watson. And at the very, very end, you get a glimpse of the real Moriarty in the Old West, where he's been hidden the whole time. So we don't really know his true genius. We find his daughter, the pseudo Moriarty, everything else. So I just wanted to point out that, people don't fully appreciate the true depth and genius of that movie. Ralph Fiennes was an excellent Moriarty.
Okay, but see, I want Ralph Fiennes to play Moriarty, but forgive me, Brad, but in a better movie, because I think he would pick an excellent, a more serious movie.
Want him to play him straight.
Yeah, I want to play
a sequel where they're in the Old West with the true Moriarty then.
And then he wouldn't be Ralph Fiennes. And that's also what we want to see. That's also what we want to see. Okay, so Howard, go ahead.
I knew Brad was going to get there somehow. I knew he was going to get to that damn film.
Oh, we all knew it.
What I was going to say with the tertiary character description from David is true in the literature, but primary characters became Moriarty and Irene Adler in almost all the screen versions. Suddenly they're just as important as Holmes and Watson in most media, which is quite a change from the hidden, invisible, and the spiderweb stuff. So
I think that's just a tribute to like how much we want, you know, those of us who write this stuff want to, you know, play in this world and mess around with these characters. And like any given Sherlockian is gonna have like some maybe even obscure character that they love and they want to do more with. So you just get that with adaptations. Go ahead, Edith.
I just want to say that, but like Moriarty, Irene is mentioned again and again and again in other stories that she doesn't appear in, so that she does sort of take on a mythical status even within the original stories.
Right. It's like, Rob Nunn, I am going to pick on him for just a second here because he has written essays about how Moriarty and Irene are both overrated, and and I'm if so if he brings that up at the 5 Miles from Anywhere meeting, I'll fight him on it, but fair fight. But it's true that I think that maybe they wouldn't have quite so much a presence in the mythos if it wasn't that Holmes didn't keep referring to them, because he does. He does refer to Irene several times, and he does refer to Moriarty, and he also refers to Moran at least a couple of times. So it doesn't come out of nowhere that these characters have more of a presence in the mythology. Olivia, did you have your hand up for, or did you just not take that off?
Actually, I forgot to, there we go.
Okay. Okay. David, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was actually, just for fun's sake, I was going to, because after the comments about, you know, that aspect of Moriarty being the spider, and in the shadows, there was a very interesting use of the Moriarty archetype in particularly in the filmed version of the Hercule Poirot novel, The Big Four.
Yes.
Okay.
Where we find out, that all of this is the result of one person doing it's all one person. And this person has been in the background the entire time. Just somebody there is just one of the other characters turns out to be the mastermind behind everything that's going on. And that would be a very, very interesting take on Moriarty in a Sherlock Holmes story, is that he let him be like, just pull something out of the hat. Can you imagine an adaptation of Hound of the Baskervilles, when we find out that Dr. Mortimer is in fact Professor Moriarty?
But the names,
well, something kind of, I'm going to spoil the movie now for anybody who hasn't seen it, but something kind of similar does happen in the Sherlock Gnomes movie.
Oh, okay.
It's not a one-to-one thing, but nevertheless, you do find out that that one character is a little more devious than you were expecting him to be. So
Kaiser
when it comes,
Sose, basically.
yeah. So when it comes to, underappreciated movies that are a little smarter than they might seem, I think that Sherlock Gnomes is another one. Go ahead, Howard.
I was going to say, you don't have to worry about spoiling that one for me, Maddie, because I'm sure as hell not going to watch that. I made
Oh.
10 of it.
Oh, it's cute, actually.
It almost makes Johnny Depp almost makes Will Ferrell look like an actor.
I actually like. Oh my gosh, I actually liked his.
Everybody can like who they like. That's fine by me. That's fine. I like Detective Pikachu right behind you too. So.
Yeah.
Well, I unironically love and will defend the Guy Ritchie films, Robert Downey Jr.'s performance as Holmes included. So I'm right there in that camp.
Your first love is the greatest there, Olivia.
Exactly.
Go ahead, Val.
Sorry, took me a minute to find the key. Val Hoski, I forgot to mention, I'm a member of the White Rose Irregulars.
Oh, nobody has introduced themselves, and so we're gonna have to do that in the show notes.
But
sorry.
If I had to choose, I should say within my span of knowledge, of characters and how the different stories, but also the different films have portrayed Moriarty. I spoke of the Sherlock series in the BBC series in my earlier comments that I felt that the unspoken of sister was more portrayed, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the way I would like to see him, and I think it would do his spider, I don't mean Spider-Man, I mean it would just that spider, that devious, that deviant, if you will, image of him that's in the canon. I would love to see him done by the producer, et cetera, in the same cinematographic style as Robert Downey Jr.'s versions of Sherlock Holmes. That type of cinematography or that style, to shooting the film. I think you could do a whole lot with it and explore the deepness, the blackness, so to speak, or the darkness of the character. You don't have to involve Holmes at all. Just Moriarty, only it might be too scary even for me to watch. Anyway, that's my view.
Okay. Kristin, are you there still?
Yep.
You had your hand up next.
Here, just
okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I also wanted to put in a plug for adaptations and pastiches that try and I guess do like different things with Moriarty. I was thinking of like 7% Solution, where he's innocent, at least of being a criminal mastermind.
Right.
And yeah, the sort of like, what if what we've been told about him is different? And as far as all of these different takes on him, there's a really interesting series by Brittany Cavallero that it's the descendants of Holmes and Watson are the main characters, but there's a whole family of like current day Moriartys, and like one of them, August, is a bit like the Moriarty in 7% Solution, and one of them, Lucian, is like obsessed with kind of reclaiming, I guess, the family power and prestige. And it's sort of like each person, they're not just on like different versions of the character, but they exist in a universe where these people were like real historical figures, so they're aware of the century of kind of stories about them, which I think is a really interesting take that not a lot of adaptations, even ones that kind of play the game, really do.
That series is excellent.
What is it? what is the name of that series?
The Charlotte Holmes series. And
Oh,
the
the
first book
Sherlock
is
Holmes.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's really cool.
Okay. Yeah, I've got a couple of those on Kindle. I need to start reading them.
Yeah, first book is a study in Charlotte. The whole series is good, but oh wow, massive trigger warning, content warning for some dark subjects that the book touches on. If you want a more specific list, feel free to, contact me on Twitter or Tumblr, Facebook, or anything like that. So, but they're good, though. Yeah, I would recommend.
Yeah.
While we're talking about different adaptations, that go in a unexpected direction, I wanted to throw out there Study in Black, that the Watsons and Holmes comic that uses Moriarty as a sneaker salesman of all things. So he's just kind of like, he's evil, but he's evil in an extremely symbolic way of corporate evil, establishment evil. So he's not really a criminal in the traditional sense, but he's always kind of lurking in the background, especially like messing with Watson's son's perception of how to represent himself, that he really needs these sneakers because everybody has them. And, it's just kind of this just different, insidious kind of, not even criminal element, but he's still there. And I thought that was one of the most unique takes on Moriarty that I'd actually seen in quite a while.
Yeah, I've got to remember to take the to spend the bucks and get those Watson and Holmes comics, because that's been something that I've been meaning to do for a long time, and I need to remember just do it. But yeah, thank you for that, Sandra, because I had no idea what actually Moriarty was like in those comics, and I like that idea of him being a representative of a different kind of evil. So that's really cool. Brad, you have been so patient having your hand up. So
well, I've actually had more thoughts since my original thought. Originally, I was just thinking it's like, part of Moriarty's big problem is that once you start defining him, he becomes this other thing, because he's really like a Lovecraft monster in his truest form, where you just can't imagine the breadth and depth of his organization. But then you have these adaptations that try to narrow him out. It's like when we were talking about books, I was thinking Michael Kurland, who did the thing where he had Sherlock Holmes was actually Moriarty's student in crime. He was like the apprentice to the master almost. It was a weird kind of thing laid out. But yeah, that's basically my point, was just that he's such at his best, he's so nebulous and so dark, like a mysterious thing.
yeah, that's fair. I like the idea of him being a Lovecraftian monster. especially I almost spoiled the Study in Emerald. I'm not going to do that. Brad, have you actually read a Study in Emerald?
Yes,
Okay.
I have. It's very good.
Okay.
And the comic book, I've read the story and the comic adaptation of it.
Oh, I haven't seen the comic. I've only ever read like the PDF version.
So
it's good.
Edith, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that people grasp on the idea of Moriarty being a spider and making that into the thing that makes him monstrous, because Sherlock Holmes is also described as a spider, as having a network web that connects all of his network. So, again, they're opposite sides of the same coin. But we don't think of that as being a monstrous quality in Holmes.
Yeah. And it's interesting because the description of Holmes as a spider came first. Yeah. So yeah, it's like, so with these episodes, I know that something that I keep doing is I keep posing questions and not then exactly answering them, because I'm not sure that it's fair to say that there are any objective answers to some of these questions, because it's more like stuff that that I think about, that I hope other people think about too. But and when I first posed this question of what makes a Moriarty, to be able to do this podcast, and we only have a few minutes left. Oh my gosh. But we did start late, and that was my bad, and I'm so sorry. But really quickly here, so that other people can talk to still. But the answer that I eventually came up with for myself is that with Moriarty being pulled in so many different, pushed and pulled in so many different directions, the characters is so elastic. I think that in terms of the Sherlockian mythos, what makes a Moriarty is that they are a dark mirror to Sherlock Holmes and a force of evil. And that's about the best that you can narrow it down to. Because I mean, in my heart, Moriarty is a 60s something professor, Anglo-Irish, and he opposes the British government because he's Irish. And that is the Moriarty that lives rent free in my head. But that is not what we get so much in adaptations. He and she are all over the place. And I mean, Moriarty has been a female character more than once. Natalie Dormer was just the most famous, but also female in Miss Sherlock, without giving away who that character actually is. But and then more adaptations than that, more versions. Mm-hmm. But it's like you can't I think that in the end you can't really pin him down as neatly as you can Holmes and Watson. Holmes always has to be a detective or something, or detective adjacent, and Watson always has to be a doctor or something adjacent to medicine to still be themselves. Moriarty really is a whole lot more nebulous than that, I think. So anybody else have any thoughts before we wrap up here? Anybody? Go ahead.
Before I was well versed in Sherlock lore, I was getting into Neil Gaiman, and I'd always heard, "Oh, a Study in Emerald! You got to read a Study in Emerald." And I didn't get it. I was like, "Oh, what are these initials? I don't understand. What's the twist? What's the joke? I'm not getting the." And of course, after I became a Sherlock, and I went back and read the story, this is the most amazing thing I've ever read. And in answer to someone in the chat, yes, you should read Kim Newman's The Hound of the D'Urbervilles. It's hysterical. And the Red Planet League is, yes, sheer pettiness and ridiculousness. Exactly. It's glorious.
Yeah. That was one of the first things that I read that was like Moriarty and Moran based. And yeah, it's definitely more parody, like a loving parody than a straight pastiche. But which I think a lot of people who write about Moriarty and Moran like to do, which, to be fair, I fall victim to that too, because I've got The Adventures of Professor Moriarty, and they ain't hardened criminals. So yeah, so even there, I guess I myself like accidentally push what it means to be a Moriarty, and sometimes it's nothing more than messing with Sherlock Holmes, apparently. So
Moriarty goes up to Holmes's house and does ding dong ditch, runs away giggling.
All right, so we're down to 3 minutes left. Anybody else? Just want to make sure. David, go ahead.
I was just going to mention one of my personal favorite iterations of a Moriarty stand-in, as it were. And that is in Doctor Who, The Master.
Master. Yes.
In
Love
all
the Master.
their wonderful incarnations.
Oh, absolutely.
My
Oh
favorite character of all time.
I
and well mirrored.
and
Well,
my
and
Say what?
oh,
Who's talking?
sorry.
I was just gonna say with the Master, unlike the Basil Rathbone films, you don't need to have an explanation for why he keeps coming back.
Yes. He regenerates. He's a Time Lord. That's why he has a different face every time.
Yep.
Okay, did I see somebody else raise a hand? Anybody? Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I have to say, and that wasn't mentioned before, I liked the idea in a way, although I know it's not very popular, that Moriarty didn't exist at all, that it was just a figment of Sherlock's mind. I mean, we have that in the last Sherlock Holmes story, and we have that in the Secret of Sherlock Holmes as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be an explanation why he's a mirror of Sherlock Holmes as well. And of course, nobody apart from MacDonald has ever met him. Sherlock Holmes met him, or he's told us he met him, but nobody else ever did.
Yeah.
I always thought that pretty interesting. That's why I love the last Sherlock Holmes story. I think that's a very unique take on the whole idea.
Yeah, that's not one that I have managed to pick up myself, but there is
I've read
really
it. I've read it. It is excellent. It is really, really excellent. I agree with him totally.
I'll have to look into that. There's honestly, there's so much out there, and I only have so much money and time, and it makes me very sad. But yeah, I try to get my hands on as much of this stuff as I can, but yeah, it is my credit. I will try to make that a priority then. So, all right, we are up on time. No. Thank you all so much for coming and for contributing. It's been great just listening to everybody. This has been so much fun. And if we can ever do this again, if I can ever figure out as interesting a topic again, we will totally try for this again. But yeah, who knows when that will be. But thank you all so much. And
thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
So yeah, and farewell to the audience for whom we are still recording, and do not know when we'll be able to do another episode because I've got a house to move into, and that's after this weekend. That's got to be my priority. So I don't know when I'll be able to do stuff again, but hopefully in the near future. And of course, always pay attention to the Twitter that I try to keep updated, Dynamics of a Pod at Twitter. So see you guys later.